Hello everyone. So today I'm going to make a little bit of a different video from what I've done in the past. I've reviewed a couple of Moonman pens if you've been following my channel. And today I'm just going to be speaking a little bit about my philosophy, if you want to call it, or my way of assessing whether or not I like a pen or not, right? And its first point I would like to make is, having a pen and using a pen is totally personal, right? It's really up to you. It's up to your size of your hands. It's up to what you like to write, how much you write, your writing pressure. Maybe you like to draw with your pens. So the way that you use your pen, and last point as well, the way that you hold the pen is also very important, I feel. So buying a pen, using a pen, and liking a pen is entirely personal. So now I'm going to go through a little bit about what I feel are important characteristics for myself when deciding whether or not I'm going to be using a pen long term. So as you can see in front of me, I've actually spoken about these pens before in one of my videos that I posted a few weeks ago. And this is the Jinhao 992. Sorry, I'm out of frame. I have many of these pens. I've actually given out these pens to family, to friends, just as a pen to be used for writing, general everyday writing, right? And I would say that you would do a lot worse than to pick up this pen for that purpose. I have, like I mentioned, I have a lot of them. I'm just gonna show you two in particular today, and while I'll go through what my preferences for a pen actually is, right? So for example, this 992, it has a fine nib, right? So it has the Jinhao's version of a fine nib, which is, I would say not super unique, right? Why is it useful for me though? Is because I tend to write with like a notebook like this, like a pretty normal style notebook. And as I mentioned previously, I actually used these pens to actually write notes for meetings, for to make lists, right, to-do lists and all that. So fine pen for small notebook makes sense to me. The other characteristic which I've also highlighted in my previous videos is actually this area of the pen, which is called the section. And this is a very important part of the pen for me personally, just because of the way I hold pens in general. I use, I think, pretty much what they call a triangle grip. And if this section here is too short or too narrow or perhaps even too broad, it would get very uncomfortable for me to write for long periods with any pen. The other thing which you will probably note as well is the length of the pen. So for the 992, due to the fact that it's very light, and weight is also a very important part of pen buying, right? It's very light, so even if you post it, the cap, even though it has a metal clip down here, it doesn't really affect the balance that much, right? So it doesn't really, the weight doesn't really make this portion of my hand uncomfortable if I write for a long period. So couple of aspects, as I mentioned, the nib, this section down here. And the other thing about this pen, which is really crucial for my use for pens, I tend to rotate pens. If you've used fountain pens for any length of time, you would know that the nibs tend to dry out if you keep the pen for months and months. Even if you leave the pen capped for months and months, you know, odds are when you pick it up, you start writing with it, some ink would have dried up down here, and then you would have like a dry start, right, every time you write. So my preference for mechanisms for feeding pens is nearly always having a converter of some sort, or even an ink cartridge. Why? Because as you can see, this pen is kind of due for refilling or cleaning out. I don't have much ink left. If I wanted to squeeze out a little bit more ink, I can always just like do this, and just by the fact of doing that little movement, the pressure of the air down here would force up a little bit more ink for me to kind of finish out this pen ink wise right before I go ahead to clean it. You can do this with other types of filling mechanisms, obviously, but I find that for the converter mechanism, it's the most convenient. And when I fill up a converter, I can choose whether or not to fill it up all the way, or I can, you know, fill it out halfway if I wanted just to try out the ink or something like that. So it gives me a lot of flexibility to have the converter down here. So and the other parts of the pen, like the clip, I don't really clip pens to my shirt and all that. I mean, it's as long as if it's not very offensive, I don't really care too much about this part of the pen. So let's do a little bit of writing with these two pens. So I'm going to bring back my notebook, and I'm going to attempt to write. Maybe we'll do fruit today. So basically, when I'm writing with this pen, okay, there's a dry start, right? When I'm writing with this pen, it is smooth, right? However, I think smoothness is kind of overrated, right? The pen definitely, the nib definitely glides on the paper, right? Okay, I messed it up. And I feel a tiny bit of feedback, but not too much. So in terms of someone who is a beginner at fountain pens, this is actually a kind of a good choice, because you can just pass the person this pen. This pen would feel very similar to like a ballpoint pen in a way, right? It will not be kind of like very different from what people are actually used to using. So if you want to get people into fountain pens, you know, this pen 992, by the way, the ink that I'm using down here is Apache, I believe it's Apache Sunset, if I'm not wrong. You know, passing someone this pen, which costs about $1 US, perfectly, you know, economical to use. Refill it as much as you want. Could even pass them a bottle of ink. Nothing wrong with that, right? Let's try out the other pen, which I've loaded with Pilot Iroshizuku Ku-Jaku, right? So maybe I'll just write dog. Please excuse my writing. For some reason, I kind of a brain freeze in terms of what to write about. But so these two colors, I actually enjoy these two colors quite a lot, right? I actually use these two colors, and I keep these two pens together just for the fact that I feel that these two colors are very complementary, and I kind of like them, you know, color-wise. So I've spoken about 992. Let's bring another pen just very briefly. for today's video. I know I'm actually at 9 minutes, or coming to 10 minutes. This is actually my wife's pen. It's a Sailor. I'm not sure what's the exact color or series, but it is a Sailor Progear Slim. And as you can tell immediately, you know, there are similarities between this pen and the 992. If I'm not wrong, I think the 992 has, you know, as its basis the 1911 Sailor, right? As you can see, some things immediately. The Sailor has an ever so slightly bigger nib. The section of the Sailor, which is this portion here, is really too short for me to use, right? So it's very small. And probably the next thing that you'll notice is that the back part of the pen is kind of truncated down here, right? So it's a shorter pen. However, you know, besides this, you know, it's the same as the 992. Right now I have an ink cartridge in here, which is just Sailor blue. However, you can use the Sailor ink, Sailor converter and use this pen perfectly fine. And it's a bit short, like I mentioned, and which means I definitely have to post the pen, right, to use it, right? So one key thing about higher end pens compared to a $1 pen, this Sailor actually has a 14 karat gold nib. And most people would assume that having 14 karat gold would mean that the feeling of the pen would be, this might be ultra smooth and you know, right, like it's on glass or something like that. But the actual fact, it's not, right? So basically, as I'm writing my usual A, B, C, D, E, F, G words, I feel more feedback with this nib compared to the 992. The 992 is very smooth. It's not to say that this one is not smooth, right? But it is definitely, you definitely can feel the feedback while using this pen, right? It's not an unpleasant feeling. What essentially the feedback is I'm actually feeling the paper, right? And the feeling is actually quite pleasant, right? So key point that I wanted to make, I'm not going to review this pen, but the key point that I wanted to make for today is smoothness isn't everything, right? And price isn't everything. I mean, this pen is about probably like $100 or slightly less than $100 US. This one is $1, right? Factor of 100. This pen is smoother, and this pen is as good of a writer as the Sailor, right? So and you know, make it as what you will, right? You know, you might like this pen more than the Sailor, right? So that's a pretty long video that I've done today, crossing into the 15-minute mark. Hope you enjoyed some of my thoughts. If you have any comments of your own, please add them in the comments below. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy some of this content, and let me know what you think. And I'll see you again in the next one. Thanks very much.